The Chris Jericho vs Bill Goldberg saga in WCW is interesting for a few reasons. Firstly, the story gives us great insight to how things work backstage in an organisation that was losing its spot as the #1 wrestling company in all of America. And secondly, it shows us the mentality of the talent who sat at the very top of the mountain. The whole ordeal led to Chris Jericho effectively leaving WCW to join the WWF. Jericho had put a lot of hope into this feud with Goldberg, but when it got shut down, it was really the last straw for the Ayatollah of rock and rolla. The story didn't end in WCW though, as Jericho and Goldberg's issues would continue when Goldberg joined the WWE in 2003, leading to a backstage fight that was well documented in Chris's second book. For this video, we're going to read quite a bit from Chris's first two books, A Lion's Tale and Undisputed. No one goes into more detail about this story than Chris Jericho, so he'll be the main source of information here. So let's get started. This is the very real rivalry between Chris Jericho and Bill Goldberg. Let's introduce the players first and see where they were at when this TV feud was pitched. Chris Jericho had come into WCW as a good guy. And Chris was so much of a good guy that it became a little overbearing for both the fans and even for Chris Jericho. Chris would come to the ring smiling at fans, hoping to give it his all in every match, and if he lost, well, he'd pick himself back up and give it another go the next week. When Chris debuted, he lacked personality, but when the company decided to turn him heel, Chris was able to really show off what he could do. Jericho, as a bad guy, became a much more entertaining performer on WCW television. Not only did his promos become more fun to watch, but he evolved his in-ring style, becoming a much better wrestler to watch inside the ropes. Jericho was actually relieved when the company asked him to turn heel. That's how bad the babyface stuff had gotten, and without a doubt, it was probably the very best thing that could happen for Chris Jericho. Bill Goldberg had debuted in WCW in late 1997, and within a matter of weeks, he captivated wrestling audiences. While it's currently in vogue for modern fans to completely trash Bill Goldberg due to his constant returns to the WWE, back then he was one of the biggest things to happen in WCW. A successful superstar that somehow thrived during the NWO era of World Championship Wrestling. Goldberg went on an incredible winning streak in WCW that eventually led him to the World Heavyweight Championship in July of 1998. And Goldberg made the roof come off the Georgia Dome when he defeated Hollywood Hogan for the belt on Monday Nitro. Bill Goldberg was a very rare case of a newcomer getting a mega push in WCW during this time period, but during Goldberg's expedited rise to the top, it's been said that some of the old-timers were in his ear, and for lack of a better term, the well was slowly getting poisoned. Our story begins then at Fall Brawl 1998, where Jericho was approached by Terry Taylor about his match for the evening. Chris Jericho wrote in his Lion's Tale book, "I arrived at the Fall Brawl 1998 pay-per-view show and Terry told me I was going to be wrestling Goldberg. I was the TV champion and I thought it was strange that they would feed me to Goldberg in a 3-minute throwaway match. But Terry explained that I wasn't going to be facing the real Goldberg, but a midget version of him instead. I asked him why and he said, no reason, I just thought you'd have some fun with it. So I challenged Goldberg to a title versus title match in my typical over-the-top fashion and out came a dwarf. He looked like a Goldberg who spent the night in a trash compactor, right down to the famous tribal tattoo. I beat Dwarfberg in 3 minutes to a course of booze and that was the end of it, except it was only the beginning." Let's go back a moment and take a look at what happened at Fall Brawl. Jericho was interviewed right at the start of the show by Mean Gene Okerlund, and Jericho announced here that he's going to face Goldberg tonight on pay-per-view. After the opening match, we see Chris Jericho backstage and he recreates Goldberg's entrance by having security escort him to the ring. Jericho Personal Security, or JPS, features Ralphus, a WCW truck driver who Jericho approached with the idea of putting him on TV. Jericho and JPS would get lost trying to find their way to the ring, and this right here was something Jericho took from Spinal Tap. Jericho getting lost backstage was a fantastic little moment, by the way, and it's an example of Chris putting in the work to try and make this rivalry somewhat different from Goldberg's other feuds at the time. When Jericho finally finds out where he needs to go, he stands in front of the audience and he tries to rip off Goldberg's pyro, only the fireworks fail to impress and Jericho loses his mind. The crowd begins a Goldberg chant as the WCW Champion's music plays in the arena, and out comes the little Goldberg, and give him credit, he does a good job with Bill's mannerisms. Little Goldberg even performs a spear inside the ring, but that was about the only thing he managed to do. Chris wins with a lion tamer, and Chris would then claim to be 1-0 against the WCW Champion. Going back to Chris's first book, Jericho wrote, "The next day I showed up in Greenville, South Carolina and saw Goldberg in the backstage area. He came up to me with fire in his eyes and a defiant grin and said, 'Well, Jericho, I hope it was worth it.' Confused, I asked him what he meant. 'People have been calling me all day and laughing at me. Well, I don't do the comedy bullshit that you do, and I just want you to know that you're gonna pay the price for it.' I was surprised at his reaction because I thought we were on good terms. We both loved hockey and once went to a Boston Bruins game together. I thought he would have gotten a kick out of Dwarfberg, but as popular and successful as Bill was, he was still very green about the business. As a result, the backstage vultures were clouding his brain with manipulation, drooling at the thought of being the one to end his winning streak. I just work here, Bill. I wish I had the power to book the matches, but I don't." He grunted as he walked away. He repeated, "I hope it was worth it, Jericho." On this episode of Nitro, Jericho didn't even make an appearance. Goldberg defeated Sting in the main event of the evening, but Jericho was not booked on the show. Chris did have an interview on Backstage Blast though, and for those who don't know, Backstage Blast was a sort of pay-per-view version of Monday Nitro, where you could see additional backstage interviews during commercial breaks. Wearing a shirt that said Jericho 1, Goldberg 0, Jericho claimed to be the new WCW champion after defeating Goldberg at Fall Brawl. Chris said that Goldberg wants a rematch, but Jericho has a flight to catch, so Goldberg will have to wait another time. I ran into Goldberg in the airport the next day and he demanded that I stop doing the angle because he didn't do comedy. I tried to explain to him that he wasn't doing the comedy, I was. Besides, the fans were digging it, and at every show the Jericho Goldberg signs multiplied while the reactions got stronger. But he still didn't understand that the more I mocked him, the more the people wanted to see him destroy me. Just as a quick side note, Chris completely messes up the order in which the next events happen in his book, and the dates are totally wrong also, so I'll put it all in the correct timeline in this video. Jericho vs Goldberg was booked again for the 28th of September edition of Monday Nitro, and Jericho had planned once again to use Little Goldberg. Chris again reenacted Goldberg's entrance before the match, and out comes the real Goldberg carrying his doppelganger on his shoulder. Jericho ends up sacrificing two of his security men so he can jump out of the ring, and Goldberg screams at Jericho, "You're next." Jericho would count this as a victory over Goldberg, so Chris was now 2 and Goldberg was still at 0. Chris then appeared on the October 8th episode of WCW Thunder where he cut a scathing promo on Goldberg, giving Goldberg the new name Greenberg, while claiming the WCW champion was afraid of the future Y2J. In Chris's book, Jericho claims this Thunder episode included the second, quote, victory over Goldberg, but it wasn't, it was actually the third. During Jericho's promo, Chris said that Goldberg isn't this unstoppable force that everyone thinks he is. Bill was given way too much in a short period of time and it's gone to Goldberg's head. Chris said that Goldberg isn't indestructible, Bill isn't gold, he's green. And Chris then invited Goldberg to step into the ring one more time for a match. Tony Schiavone says that Goldberg isn't in the arena, but Chris doesn't buy it. Goldberg's theme music then plays, and as expected, nobody shows up. Nick Patrick counts Goldberg out, and Chris celebrates in the ring. He says he's now 3-0 against Goldberg, and Thunder moves on to its next segment. There's a good chance that Goldberg again got upset over this promo, as on the next episode of Nitro, Jericho came out wearing his usual gear. He wasn't with his security team, and he had a match against Raven where the commentary team didn't make any mention of the Jericho vs Goldberg rivalry. There were plenty of signs in the audience regarding Jericho vs Greenberg, but it was almost like the story had been completely wrapped up at this point. The next week though, it was back on, and Goldberg would finally get physical with Jericho while the crowd completely ate it up. Chris came out on the October 19th episode of Nitro along with Ralphus, wearing a shirt that now said Jericho 3, Greenberg 0. Chris says that he has beaten Goldberg 3 times and he's ended the streak 3 times, and Jericho is annoyed that he hasn't been given the WCW Championship. Jericho challenges Goldberg to another match while Ralphus stands there looking a little confused, but Mean Gene informs Jericho that Goldberg is not in attendance tonight for Monday Nitro. Jericho then decides to go after Goldberg's challenger at Halloween Havoc, Diamond Dallas Page. Page shows up, and after Ralphus gets kicked out of the way, DDP tells Chris that he wants a match tonight in the middle of the ring. The match takes place, and Goldberg shows up towards the end of the bout to hit a spear on Jericho. DDP then pulls Jericho away from a jackhammer, and Chris takes a diamond cutter. And the match ends with officials hitting the ring to separate Page and Goldberg. Jericho was simply an afterthought here. There was a great pop when Goldberg hit the spear, but to be fair, there was always a great pop when Goldberg hit the spear. In saying that though, Jericho had done a great job of building this rivalry up, and what you may have noticed here is that Goldberg practically done nothing at all in terms of building the feud through promos and interviews. We already know why though. Bill Goldberg did not want to work with Chris Jericho. Halloween Havoc takes place and Jericho is kept completely away from Goldberg. Chris defends his TV title again against Raven, while Goldberg successfully defeats Diamond Dallas Page in a good main event match. Chris Jericho vs Goldberg was supposed to take place on the Nitro after Halloween Havoc according to Chris's book, but the match ended up getting cancelled. Jericho wrote, "I showed up for Nitro in Phoenix. Eric told me I was going to be wrestling Goldberg that night. I asked Eric what the story of the match was going to be. Story? The same story Goldberg always tells. He beats you up and pins you with the jackhammer in 3 minutes. I thought I'd entered the Twilight Zone because he was talking to me like the previous 6 weeks of angles hadn't happened. What about our angle? The fans are really into it. There never was an angle. If there was, it ends tonight." That was enough for me. Before my match with Dwarfberg, if I'd been booked to be the next victim of Goldberg's streak, I would have done it, no questions asked. But the bookers got me into this and I'd made the angle work. I didn't expect to beat Goldberg and I didn't want to, but the Goldberg Jericho angle was giving both of us an extra dimension and there was no way I was going to allow them to piss away all my hard work. I've done some really strong work with this, Eric, even if it was just a throwaway. I don't want to waste it on a 3-minute squash. I really think people will pay money to see him kill me. Let me have the best squash match of all time with him on pay-per-view. He can give me 10 jackhammers if you want. I'm not saying I don't want him to beat me, I'm just saying that we've got something special here. I don't know if Eric understood my point or if he just didn't want to put up with my bullshit, but he cancelled the match. I'd avoided one monster even though I'd created another one. Jericho's next TV match was against Disco Inferno on the October 29th episode of Thunder, so again it felt like Goldberg vs Jericho had been completely forgotten about. The next week on Nitro, it was back on again. Jericho comes out and he says he respects Bill Goldberg, and Chris calls Goldberg one of the greatest champions in WCW history. Jericho says his past issues with Goldberg is now water under the bridge, and Chris leads a Goldberg chant as the interview comes to an end. Chris then retained his TV title via time limit draw in a match against Billy Kidman. On Thunder, Jericho's respect on a complete 180 when he said he's a better champion than Bill Goldberg. And what a real mess this whole thing was now turning out to be. From the start-stop nature of the feud to promos contradicting each other, you can tell nobody really knew what was going on here and nobody knew how this thing was going to end. Jericho's idea was to put on the biggest squash match in the history of WCW pay-per-view. Jericho was ready to take a complete beating from Goldberg after weeks and weeks of build-up, and Jericho felt people would pay to finally see Goldberg destroy Chris. But it's evident just by revisiting the TV shows that this whole rivalry was up in the air. There's zero consistency here. Jericho was also claiming 4 wins over Goldberg at this point. I think he was including the DDP match in his count here, but it's irrelevant, it doesn't matter, as our story was going to end abruptly and all the work Chris put into this feud was going to get thrown out the window. According to Chris, Goldberg wanted to end the rivalry on TV with a squash match on the November 9th episode of Nitro. Kevin Sullivan told Jericho he was losing to Goldberg and that was it, the feud was over. And Chris tracked down Eric Bischoff to get some answers. Jericho told Bischoff he wasn't losing tonight on TV, and Bischoff told Jericho to get in his office right now for a meeting. The following is from Jericho's first book. He must have suspected that I was going to question the match because Goldberg was already in Eric's office along with a pissed off Hulk Hogan. Some serious shit was about to go down. This has gone on too long, we've accommodated you long enough, tonight you're losing to Bill, Eric explained. The three of them waited for my response. I want to lose to Bill, I just want to do it right. People want him to kick my ass and I believe they'll pay to see it. Then I played my case to Hogan using language I knew he'd understand. I thought this business was about making money. You've done it better than anyone, Hulk. This match will make money. Hogan didn't disagree, but said it's never bad to lose to the champion. I'm sick of doing this comedy shit, Goldberg jumped in. You could never last with me in the ring. I'm the guy who stands in fire for my ring entrance. I'm the guy who beat Hulk Hogan for the title. You're the guy who would go down right now if I kicked you in the nuts, I jackhammered back. Okay, let's not get carried away, Judge Bischoff interjected. This was becoming the people's court in tights. Well, what do you want to do? Eric demanded. What's your idea? First of all, let us work this match at the next pay-per-view, which was 13 days away. Bill can squash the living hell out of me then. Okay, what are we going to do tonight then? Before arriving at the Nassau Coliseum that day, I'd come up with a plan. I'll go to the ring and call out Goldberg. Mean Gene can tell me that everyone knows he's not in the building, including me. I'll proceed to rip Bill a new asshole with insults. While I'm doing this, we'll show Bill arriving at the arena on the Tron. I'll be too wrapped up in my own promo to notice him walking through the halls and into his dressing room where he'll see me on the monitor. I'll finish my insults and leave the ring, but when I'm walking down the aisle soaking up the adulation of the fans as if it's for me, Bill walks out of the entrance and stands behind me. When I turn around, he spears the hell out of me halfway down the aisle. Then we wrestle at World War III and he destroys me in the most entertaining squash match of all time. Nobody said a thing, and as the logic of my idea sank in, both Bischoff and Hogan looked intrigued. But when Eric said he liked the idea, Hogan didn't agree. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this, but if you think you can make it work, then try it and he can beat you at the pay-per-view. But if it doesn't work, Bill beats you next week and that's the end of it. So Goldberg beats the hell out of Jericho on Nitro and it was brilliant. The crowd cheered throughout the whole segment and Goldberg was a little extra violent on this night as Chris gets completely destroyed. Jericho said that Hulk Hogan walked into unfamiliar territory after the match, the common locker room, and Hogan admitted that he was wrong and Jericho was right. Chris was surprised that Hogan apologised to him and he thought for sure that the World War III match was now going to take place. Chris even came up with an idea where he'd wear amateur wrestling boots for the match and Goldberg would spear him out of his new shoes. But then Chris showed up for TV the next week and he was told that the feud had been dropped. Bischoff told Chris that the pay-per-view match wasn't going to happen, and Chris then decided that his WCW career was officially over. Instead of Goldberg versus Chris Jericho, the fans got Bobby Duncum Jr. versus Chris Jericho. The fact that I couldn't even get a pay-per-view squash match with Goldberg showed me that WCW didn't see me as a moneymaker or a big league player. My attitude about the company at that point became the same as when you call a girl 10 times and she never calls you back. You start off hoping she'll call, then you get bummed out, then desperate, and then you realise it's time to give up and move on. Had he, Bischoff, called me back anytime before the Goldberg angle was kiboshed, I would have signed a new WCW contract. But the moment I found out that the angle had been shit-canned, I wasn't interested in being part of WCW no more. Of course, the day I found out the angle had been dropped was the day Eric showed up with a new contract for me to sign. He took it out of his little knapsack and told me to sign it on the spot. I hemmed and hawed and told him I needed a lawyer to look at it first. Once I made up my mind not to sign the deal, I called Vince Russo. I told him I wanted out and he suggested a meeting with Vince McMahon himself. So he made the arrangements for me to fly to Connecticut for a top secret meeting at Vince's house. Jericho would spend the remainder of his WCW career avoiding Eric Bischoff backstage, and when it became clear he wasn't going to sign, Chris was pretty much taken off TV. You'd think this is the end of our story, but we've got a little more, so let's fast forward to 2003. Chris Jericho is now part of the WWE and he has an outstanding match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 19. And on the same show, it's announced that Bill Goldberg is going to arrive in WWE the next night on Raw. Goldberg shows up, he spears The Rock, and within no time at all, the backstage feud between Jericho and Goldberg starts up once again. Vince McMahon wanted Chris Jericho to welcome Goldberg to the company and help him navigate his way around as much as he could. Jericho wasn't so sure if Vince knew about his past with Goldberg, but Jericho obliged, saying he would help Bill out as much as he could. Here's what happened backstage, according to Jericho's second book. It's the best source we have about the backstage fight between Chris Jericho and Bill Goldberg. It was Goldfinch's first Raw, and I worked with Triple H versus Shawn and Booker T. After the match, I was pulled aside and informed that Goldsmith had spent the entire match barking to Nash about how I didn't know how to sell properly and how I wouldn't do business with him in WCW. I never had a problem selling for him or anybody else for that matter. I've always done business, and it was business I was trying to do when I wanted to put Bill over properly in WCW. But it was obvious that he still had a chip on his shoulder when it came to me. It made me mad that he had only been with the company for a little over a week and he was already up to his old tricks. I marched straight into the dressing room and saw Nash sitting there in the corner like a giant praying mantis, acting like he owned the place, while Billy Boy sat across from him with a self-indulgent smile on his face. Throwing caution to the wind, I stood in front of him and stared directly into his eyes. I heard you were saying some stuff about me during my match. I don't know if you realise it, but things have changed. This isn't WCW. If you have something to say to me, say it to my face. Goldberg gave a shaky laugh and said, I didn't say anything about you. Bullshit, I know you did. Something snapped in the Burgermeister and he jumped to his feet. Oh yeah, what about all that stuff you were saying about me on the internet? You've got to be kidding me. I didn't spend enough time on the internet to check out Club Jenna properly, let alone talk shit about Bill fucking Goldeye. What are you talking about? A vein in his neck popped out like a worm as he shouted back. Mike Tenay told me you said some stuff about me on the internet. I looked at him in disbelief and said, listen Bill, it's simple. I could be your best friend in this company or your worst enemy. We're probably going to be working with each other at some point, and I could either make you look like $1 million or make you look like shit, and you wouldn't know the difference. We're all here to make money and do business together, so just fucking relax. You never wanted to do the job for me in WCW, you're a prima donna. You're totally wrong about Before I could finish the sentence, Goldfish grunted like a Neanderthal and grabbed me by the throat. Once Goldster made his move, I reacted the only way I knew how. I swatted his hand off my throat and gave him a two-handed push to the chest. He rushed forward with his head down and tried to tackle me like the ex-NFL lineman that he was. I stepped to the side like the world's worst matador and grabbed him in a front face lock. I think I surprised the shit out of him with my lethal hold and was able to power him down to the ground, applying pressure because I knew if I pushed his throat into his chest long enough, he might pass out. I really hoped that he would go to sleep because I was sure that he was going to fire up and kick the shit out of me. I continued to hold my ground and couldn't figure out why he wasn't fighting back. I got a little lazy and released the pressure slightly, and suddenly he rolled on top of me. I was freaking out at this point, convinced that he was going to eat me, but I held on to my patented front face lock. He started bucking around like a mechanical bull, but surprisingly, I was able to use his momentum against him to roll him over again. I was getting cocky at this point because he wasn't moving. In the back of my mind, I still had the idea that he was going to morph into a savage animal, throw me off and draw and quarter me, but he never did. It seemed like the Goldslagger was all smoke and mirrors. Maybe he had always gotten by on the intimidation factor and had never been tested. He got to his feet again and we busted through the doors at the back of the dressing room, straight into the hallway filled with surprised fans who got a bonus match that night. We scuffled back into the dressing room and we were finally broken up by Arn Anderson, Terry Taylor, Hurricane, Christian and Booker T. Nash Mantis continued to sit in his chair in the corner of the room watching the festivities. Goldfinger and I were separated, and if you've ever been in a fight that's been broken up by your friends, you can probably relate to what happened next. As Christian and Hurricane were restraining me, they were inadvertently setting me up to be murdered at the same time, because when Goldsworthy broke free of the pack, they still had my arms pinned to my sides. Let go, he's going to kill me, I screamed, closing my eyes and preparing to have my face caved in. They realised what was going on and let me go at the last minute, but it was too late. He broke through and reared his fist back. I tensed up and prepared for him to knock my block off, but he started pulling my hair instead. I couldn't believe that the mighty Bergold was tugging at my hair like a 5-year-old during playtime. What was up with this guy? I figured if he hadn't knocked me out yet, he was never going to, so I pried his hand out of my hair and pie-faced him as hard as I could. He stumbled back and stared at me in surprise. I was done with this bitch fight and I screamed, "What the hell is wrong with you, man? You're acting like a goof." Goldrush screamed back, "Your mother is a fucking goof." Booker T got the most quizzical look on his face as he chewed on the unlit cigar he always seemed to have in his mouth and said, "Hold up, did you just say his mother is a fucking goof? That's the worst insult I ever heard, man." After a lot of shouting, the two men shook hands, they tried to forget everything, and they eventually ended up working together on TV. Chris said in his book also that Goldberg even invited him onto his plane a few times to travel between shows, and Jericho thinks Goldberg wanted to show his good side and show Jericho and everyone else that he wanted to get along with everyone in WWE. Jericho also said though that he thinks Goldberg's status as a badass was tarnished by the fact that Jericho took him down. Chris says he doesn't ever want to get into a real scuffle with Goldberg ever again. The final score is Jericho 1, Goldberg 0. Hopefully you enjoyed this video looking at the Chris Jericho vs Goldberg rivalry. I know it's one-sided here and I've used a lot of quotes from Jericho, and that's because Goldberg really doesn't talk about it all that much. In regards to WCW, Goldberg said he thought a match between him and Jericho was bad business and he wasn't interested in doing comedy matches, and that's why he ultimately refused to work with Chris. It's clear too that people were in his ear at the time telling him what to do. According to Eric Bischoff, Goldberg was getting more and more insecure as his title reign continued, so that's probably a big factor. In regards to the fight backstage in WWE, well, maybe Goldberg stays quiet about that because Chris seemingly got the better of him, and no one ever wants to talk about their defeats. But anyway, that'll do it for today. Thanks for watching guys, and take care.